Well, this is a video I never thought I had the knowledge to make, not to mention that I'm surprised that no one else made a video involving these two films that were made by the same company that went out of business nearly 2 decades ago. Today marks the 17th anniversary of The Ant Bully, and I remember watching this film when it was airing on TV during my childhood, and yet I never had the knowledge that this film was the reason onto why Jimmy Neutron Season 4 never became a thing, all the while getting a conclusion. And to be perfectly honest, I was one of those people that were against the Ant Bully because of that. But as time went by, and after watching this film for preparation for this video itself, I've got a feeling that this film has been overlooked way too much on the fact that it caused Jimmy Neutron to come to an end, to the point that this film, despite not being one of the best films of all time, isn't one of the worst films of all time. When it comes to my original plans, I was originally gonna be reviewing Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius the movie by itself. But considering the other plans got in the way and it took years and years of reconsidering, I felt like that this was a perfect opportunity to compare Jimmy Neutron to The Ant Bully, because even though that both films are highly different from each other, they still have similarities that one film did better while the other not so much. Though then again, The Ant Bully is supposed to be its own thing and nowhere have same elements as Jimmy Neutron. There's no technology like Jimmy Neutron, there's no boy geniuses in Jimmy Neutron, well, when it comes to the ants, but I'm gonna get to them later, and the fact that the main character is supposed to be a boy that has no values, considering that he takes out his aggression on ants due to him getting bullied by bullies. Though at the same time, that really sums up the huge comparison that Lucas and Jimmy has, but I'm gonna get to that later. To be perfectly real with you, these two films, watching back to back, you can really tell that the visions between two films are a lot more different, considering that Nickelodeon was doing the advertising for Jimmy Neutron, and when it comes to Warner Brothers for The Ant Bully, I'm gonna be perfectly real with you, it's really questionable on how the advertisement towards The Ant Bully and the marketing is easily questionable, because The Ant Bully had a video game adaptation. I remember that there were either McDonald's or Burger King commercials involving The Ant Bully, and to be perfectly real with you, despite with all that, The Ant Bully still bombed at the box office, or become a box office failure when it comes to domestically in the United States. In comparison of Jimmy Neutron that did well, believe me when I say this, I think that one of the reasons onto why Jimmy Neutron did well in the box office is not because of Nickelodeon promoting it. It's mainly the fact that CGI was brand new at the time, and seeing new animation studios doing CGI became a huge factor in the animation industry at the time. Pixar released Monsters, Inc. a month before Jimmy Neutron premiered, and when it came to The Ant Bully, around the time Pixar's Cars was also in theaters. But when it came to two animated films, a week before The Ant Bully, Monster House, which became successful, and the week after The Ant Bully was Barnyard, which is a Nickelodeon movie that did well domestically more than The Ant Bully, that ended up getting a show of its own. You know, if people are going to state that The Ant Bully is the reason that Jimmy Neutron came to an end, it's honestly hilarious to think that people just didn't realize that Nickelodeon technically killed Jimmy Neutron by having DNA Productions go out of business because they were releasing their own films around the time The Ant Bully was in theaters. And considering that The Ant Bully was sandwiched between this and Monster House, it really feels somewhat weirder to realize this information, only to understand that Barnyard and Monster House are probably one of the reasons onto why animation in 2006 just hasn't been the same like it was in 2001. Though then again, I haven't talked about the characters and the plot itself involving both films, but with this information coming in mind, it's worth noting that Jimmy Neutron, that is from Nickelodeon, while The Ant Bully is from Warner Brothers, and the fact that Warner Brothers do not see the value in Ant Bully, unlike Nickelodeon sees the value of Jimmy Neutron, it really shows that DNA Productions really have a rocky history and time when it comes to cooperating new projects, considering that in the majority of 2002 through 2003 or some sort, they were focusing on Jimmy Neutron while Nickelodeon premiered the episodes in 2004, 5, and 6. And considering that the original plans were to have the TV show come out first while the movie come out later, it really shows that DNA Productions is passionate when it comes to taking this risk of releasing the movie first before doing the TV series afterwards. Because to be perfectly honest with you, seeing the development history involving Jimmy Neutron really sums up a lot that CGI studios like DNA Productions really have something in the worth of quality when it comes to how they handle animation, unlike Pixar and DreamWorks. Because when it comes to Pixar, they experience animation around the time Jimmy Neutron is out, mainly Monster Inc. with The Fall. And when it comes to DreamWorks, around the time they're doing 2D animation, not until they were fully committed onto doing CGI after the failure of Sinbad in 2003, well, they take animation seriously when it comes to CGI. CGI from studios like DNA Productions really have been overshadowed by those companies, and this was before Ice Age came out, with it being Blue Sky's first animated film. And judging of how The Ant Bully has become a topic involving Pixar's A Bug's Life and DreamWorks' Ants, all the while that it's been sandwiched between two animated films around the time in the summer of 2006. There was so much to discuss involving The Ant Bully that having a history of its own is somewhat complicated compared to Jimmy Neutron, considering that nowadays we don't have a lot of bug films involving bugs. Well, aside from the DreamWorks film B-movie that came out at the end of 2007, but considering that people just can't be able to take that film seriously and just make memes out of it, it's difficult to make a good Bugs movie. At least from my opinion. Let's get into the plots. In the beginning of the film, Jimmy Neutron needs to get a signal from aliens from outer space, or intergalactic species of some sort. And since that this takes place way earlier in the beginning of Jimmy Neutron before the series, it really shows that they're trying a lot in order to showcase on how talking to strangers is a problem, and the fact that Jimmy Neutron caused nearly every single parent in Retroville to be abducted by aliens or Yokians. It really shows that this movie took itself seriously by having the kids learn something in value of having parents. Now when it comes to the Ant Bully, since it's not supposed to take place in a higher scale, mainly in outer space like Jimmy Neutron, it's in a smaller scale in a bug's perspective. Well, due to getting bullied constantly, Lucas decides to take out his frustration towards the ants. and since that this is based off of a book, I can easily tell what they're going for, but at the same time, the elements that they have isn't enough. Now, I understand that this film is just trying to show us that Lucas is only taking out his frustration towards the ants because he doesn't know, and kids at Lucas's age would feel that way. Unfortunately, considering that they didn't include much involving how Lucas is feeling towards the ants around him, and the fact that he changes because of how the ants are respecting towards him, this really feels so off when it comes to how A Bug's Life in Ants executes the ants in how the colony functions. Because let me tell you, with this taking place in a much more different direction compared to what those movies did, it's really saying something that when people see the ant bully, when it comes to promotional or the poster itself, while it was in theaters or before that, they probably wouldn't invest it with the idea of Bugs' colony, mainly the ants' colony, considering that they probably witnessed that much more better executed in A Bug's Life and even Ants. And while I understand that the entire motivation of this film is to have nothing to do with the drama with A Bug's Life and Ants, it doesn't change the fact that they didn't do it any better, because I really felt like that throughout this entire movie, the ants themselves, even if they're supposed to be living creatures that have lives of their own, while in the real world it's beyond the case, they don't do anything severe towards Lucas. Like, the only closest that we ever going to get is mainly him preventing to go back into normal size until he learns what it's like to becoming an ant. You see, when A Bug's Life and Ants do these types of storylines when it comes to a life being difficult as a bug or an ant, I can understand the intentions, because in The Bug's Life it's mainly just giving food to the grasshoppers while one main character is just trying to make a huge difference, and while in Ants, considering that it's taking itself seriously compared to A Bug's Life and from this film, it really feels like that they'll really want to make the ants a lot more tougher while dealing with a society that is a lot more for adults rather than kids that can instantly see what is less threatening until they experience it once they get older. And yes, I understand that the ants in this and A Bug's Life are also adults, but considering that Ants is taking itself seriously compared to these two films, I've seen it all. And it's honestly ironic to think that when people have been criticizing Shark Tale for not taking its world building seriously, unlike Finding Nemo, it's somewhat ironic, well, in the world building of A Bug's Life, when it comes to the sizes of the ants, Pixar didn't care about it and people didn't mind it. But in Ants, DreamWorks took the bugs seriously when it comes to how they act differently and how menacing they are compared to the ants. You know, in all honesty, the fact that DreamWorks can do something right involving the world building, while in Shark Tale they did the opposite, is really saying something. The only difference is that Pixar did something right involving the plot of A Bug's Life and pretty much mainly the characters, and in Finding Nemo, they literally took everything seriously on making a good film. It really feels like that studios like Pixar and DreamWorks were a lot more different back then, but mainly for good intentions, while nowadays it's mostly debatable. My point is that the mortality in this film is really non-existent at times. And I'm being really honest with you that when it came to the mortality of the Pixar and DreamWorks films, I'm pretty sure that people can't be able to take this film seriously, even if it's supposed to be comedic. And in comparison of Jimmy Neutron, Not to say that I'm a fan of this, but the mortality in Jimmy Neutron was better executed compared to the Ant Bully. And while I understand that there were a lot of setbacks, especially from the show itself, I can totally understand why people would dig into Jimmy Neutron completely, even though it's not trying too hard with its characters and world building. Whenever I watch episodes from Jimmy Neutron and bits and pieces from the film itself, I not only see new things, but it really shows that Jimmy Neutron has aged better compared to other Nicktoons. And to be perfectly real with you, the more I realize of how people just weren't into Jimmy Neutron completely despite being popular back in the day, really shows that DNA Productions had passion into making this because they have the right tools that actually turn into treasure. But when it came to the Ant Bully, since that they're starting from scratch, they can't be able to get treasure again. It's mainly out of luck if they ended up getting treasure that is done, that people do enjoy, and what some people don't. Look, I understand that nowadays Nickelodeon isn't the best. In fact, they've become much more worse. But to give them credit, they at least see the value of what Jimmy Neutron will accomplish ever since that they pitched the idea to begin with. Because let me tell you, whenever Nickelodeon pitched a cartoon in the earlier years of animation, which was before SpongeBob's popularity skyrocketed through the roof, I can instantly tell that they actually see the value in what cartoons are successful, and while I understand that they just didn't give chances towards other cartoons, which is really unprofessional, I can instantly tell that they actually focus on how valuable a cartoon is in order to keep it going for a little longer. And while it's supposed to be a point where a cartoon should come to an end and it overstays its welcome, I don't even think if they're willing to greenlit the Ant Bully in the same ways as the Barnyard, because at the same time, unlike Barnyard, they can't be able to see the value of the Ant Bully, unlike Jimmy Neutron. And considering that Warner Brothers can't be able to take this film seriously as a good film on its own, despite the passion behind it, mainly the animation and a few good ideas, I think it sums up a lot onto why that animation nowadays, when it comes to CGI, are a lot more experimental. And even though that this film came out in 2006, if it came out nowadays, I'm pretty sure people won't be able to see this film as a good film, or even an underrated film, mostly a forgettable film, which is something that the Ant Bully lacks in comparison of Jimmy Neutron. Here's what I mean. The characters in the Ant Bully, while they are maybe good at times, they're not properly executed. And believe me when I say this, whenever I see a review of the Ant Bully and the fact that people just can't be able to take the characters seriously because of how selfish they are and the fact that their motives are somewhat confusing, I'm gonna be really honest with you that whenever I think about that information for a second, all I can think of is that these characters aren't really developed that much, which is really saying something that in Jimmy Neutron, while the characters aren't developed completely, they ended up becoming really unforgettable characters unlike the Ant Bully. Let's get into Fugax, who is the comic relief of this film. Back then, he somewhat got on my nerves, and after watching this film, he's not as bad as I thought, considering that other characters from other animated films are much more worse, and the fact that Bruce Campbell is having a blast voicing Fugax. At the same time, it really feels like that he's trying way too hard to be entertaining. In comparison of Sheen from Jimmy Neutron, I'm gonna be really honest with you, he was a lot more funny in the TV series, but in the movie, he wasn't that flanderized. And judging the fact that he doesn't try too hard, and even though that there was some occasions where Fugax doesn't try too hard completely, it's really weird to think that Sheen ended up becoming a much more funny character compared to Fugax. I'm just saying that Fugax isn't a terrible character. I've just seen much worse characters that, if you look into how they were developed, it really feels like that you will probably forgive Fugax a little bit more, considering that he wasn't that annoying than he was back in 2006. Quila, despite having different values in this film, really feels like an ant version of Libby from Jimmy Neutron. Granted, it's not 100% completely, considering that she is a forger, but if you take into consideration that both characters are voiced by black people, and the fact that the black people are actually girls, and the fact that this is mainly a much more braver character compared to Libby. Isn't it weird that whenever I see these two characters, well, the other character is a lot more braver compared to the other, I'm really thinking that DNA Productions really wanted Libby to be mainly Cindy's friend, but then she got development as the series became a thing afterwards. While Quila, despite being a forginal and a lot more different compared to Libby, it doesn't change the fact that there's supposed to be a comedic subplot involving Fugax and Quila when it comes to Fugax flirting with her, and she really hates it. And to be perfectly real with you, if you're going to say that in Jimmy Neutron, Sheen and Libby's relationship was better executed, and the fact that it's a better version than this, I've always thought about the ideal, considering that these characters have similar traits, and yet at the same time, this isn't meant to be story-driven and mainly for a comedic gag. And sure, there wasn't any romantic connection between Libby and Sheen in the film, and it only developed in the series. But the more you realize of how DNA Productions are just trying to recycle ideals from Jimmy Neutron and just change them differently in the Ant Bully, you can really tell that the similarities really come into play. Zach being one of the main characters while being voiced by Nicolas Cage himself, since that he has similarities of Jimmy Neutron on doing potions, which is somewhat similar to Jimmy making inventions, I've got the impression that he would have done a lot more better and done the same traits as Jimmy Neutron, but at the same time, he doesn't get a lot of screen time in order to establish of how much of a better character he is in order to make a colony a better place. And considering that he has similar traits of Flick from A Bug's Life when it comes to creating ideals, despite the fact that Flick is an inventor while Zach is a wizard, they really dropped the ball on Zach in this. Because if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, the scenes involving around him are good, and Nicolas Cage did a very good job on voicing him, but at the same time, I don't even think that he was really that fleshed out, and the fact that the deleted scenes really damaged this film by not being included sums up a lot that DNA Productions really need to take these films seriously if they're willing to start from scratch. As for the topic of parents between two films, it's night and day. And believe me, in the case of Jimmy Neutron, with the parents being a major factor for the kids to rescue them, I'm gonna be really honest with you, this is where the Ant Bully really fails at, because if you ever remember watching a scene involving Judy or even Hugh, which I'm pretty sure you have considering the memes behind Hugh, you can really tell that there was a lot of passion into writing the parents compared to the Ant Bully, but like I said, the deleted scenes not included in the Ant Bully really damages the credibility of Lucas's parents. Now, the reason onto why Jimmy is having a problem with his parents is because he wants to go to Retroland, which is on a school night. And after getting the suggestion from Nick to sneak out, he denies and decides to do it his own way. Mainly trying to give her gifts in order to be supportive as possible. But unfortunately, Judy declines on allowing Jimmy to go to Retroland due to it being a school night. You know, in all honesty, when people criticize on the fact that a school night is happening and the fact that an amusement park is opening on a school night is considered stupid, but in all honesty, knowing full well that anything can happen in any day of the year, Jimmy Neutron is pretty much focusing on what is really important involving living with your parents while you're a child. Because as far as I'm concerned, we all went through that scenario on being a child at one point while being raised by two parents. And since this plays a major role of the Yokians abducting the parents while giving Jimmy and his friends their wish of enjoying life without parents, this movie didn't need to try hard, and yet at the same time, it manages to succeed to be a really entertaining movie. And while I understand that the villains of Jimmy Neutron are a different story entirely, that doesn't automatically mean that they were forgettable. But we're still talking about parents, so Lucas's parents in the Ant Bully are really underused. I understand that they're not supposed to be the main characters, but when you take into consideration the fact that the parents in Jimmy Neutron were done much more better, and the fact that Lucas's mother just treats Lucas as a baby, and the fact that she doesn't care about what Lucas is going through because Lucas wants to take care of things on his own. As much as I try to understand Lucas's point of view at times, it doesn't change the fact that Lucas's mother, especially father, barely contributes much other than mainly for comedy for some occasions, mainly from Lucas's father. Here's the thing. In the deleted scenes, there was a clip of Lucas's mother being extremely worried of Lucas being in trouble while not being supportive, unlike Kova and the other ants. And for me personally, this is, well, nearly everything that I've witnessed involving the human characters in the Ant Bully are difficult to root for. Like, you can argue that some parents aren't really that protective, and they mostly support their children when needed. But whenever I look at Lucas's mother in this, and the fact that the deleted scenes are no longer present, it makes me wonder on the fact that Lucas was ever in a scenario where he's ever been supportive towards other characters that aren't insects. And while Lucas's mother calls him Peanut, that doesn't change the fact that she still treats him as a baby. I'm gonna be perfectly real with you. The deleted scenes were a lot more better in any other film that I've seen. Like, deleted scenes may be important, but whenever I look at the deleted scenes of the Ant Bully, it really shows that they're huge factors compared to what I've witnessed in other deleted scenes from other films. Like, say all you want on the fact that other deleted scenes from other films are just as important, despite the fact that they were deleted. But when you look into the Ant Bully's deleted scenes, after watching the Ant Bully itself, it really shows that the relationship in the film itself just isn't as impactful without the deleted scenes. I'm gonna be really honest with you that Lucas's relationship with his family just isn't as impactful compared to Jimmy Neutron's relationship with his parents. Now let's get into the comedy of the Ant Bully. There were a few jokes and few comedic gags that I actually enjoyed, but for the majority of it, it just isn't as funny as Jimmy Neutron's. Since the humor from DNA Productions is somewhat mixed when it comes to you being new to it if you ever watched Jimmy Neutron for the first time, but once you get into this film, you'll probably not be a fan of it considering that it takes up the majority of the film. And do I even need to make the joke of Lucas realizing that he was eating caterpillar poo? Which for me personally, in out of context, it's difficult to see this as an actual funny scene, which for me personally wasn't really funny to begin with. It's really hard to find this film amusing at some points. I'm gonna be really honest with you. I understand that this type of writing is supposed to be different compared to Jimmy Neutron, especially with a comedy, but considering that DNA Productions did really good with the comedy in Jimmy Neutron, especially in the show, it's really weird to think that the comedy in this just isn't as funny compared to Jimmy Neutron. Some occasions, yes, but at the same time, they're not really big home runs. I've already mentioned that Fugax tries way too hard to be entertaining, while Sheen does it much more better. So let's get into a scene-by-scene comparison onto how Jimmy Neutron handles its humor better than the Ant Bully. In the montage of the kids enjoying themselves without any parents or adults in the way, Sheen pees in the shower. It's gross, but at the same time, it works considering that no adults or parents are around to stop kids from doing stuff like this. When it comes to the Ant Bully, they did the same joke, but it's literally for no reason considering that Lucas had to go and he ended up peeing the colony. I understand that it's supposed to be comedic, but at the same time, knowing full well that Lucas's development really feels a lot more off, knowing full well that he's only doing this because he doesn't understand much at a very young age. I'm starting to convince that the bullies instantly peed on him, and that really embarrassed him to the point that he wants to pee on the ants, which for me personally, it's really odd. Like, really, really odd to use peeing for revenge against the ants after getting peed on. And since that some characters in Jimmy Neutron are comedic and it showcases more in the show, it really feels like that the characters, mainly the background characters from the Ant Bully, are also trying way too hard, just like Fugax. Believe me when I say this, with Hugh Neutron being really iconic and ends up becoming a fighter in the Nicktoons fighting game, is really saying something that people remember these characters a lot more based off how they were portrayed and how the voice actors instantly capture the characters so good. I'm gonna be really honest with you, with the comedic timing from the background ants, despite the fact that they really, really cannot stand Peanut the Destroyer, is what they call Lucas. It's hard to take them seriously, knowing full well that their lives as ants are supposed to be meaningful, but it just damages that credibility alone. Like, the fact that this movie is supposed to take itself seriously, but at times not really taking itself seriously, then I can instantly tell that Barnyard that ends up becoming a comedic film, but with serious moments that are actually done correctly, I'm gonna be really honest with you that Nickelodeon can instantly see the value of chaotic nature better than the Ant Bully. I'm gonna be really honest with you, isn't it weird whenever I think about that Nickelodeon sees chaotic nature better than what other animation studios do? Because it's really saying something that Warner Brothers is the same company that has Bugs Bunny, mainly the Looney Tunes, and yet at the same time, they didn't take this film seriously, while Nickelodeon took Barnyard seriously. And since I've watched Barnyard after watching the series during my childhood, I'm gonna be really honest with you, it really feels like night and day when it comes to the animated film and the series, because when it came to the animated series, it tried way too hard and it somewhat succeeded, but when you look into the film itself, it's a completely different franchise in general. And the fact that it managed to become successful and gain a TV series of its own, Nickelodeon pretty much saw these ideals work and see the value of them, and yet they picked the right value and not to make a mistake of it. Though then again, it doesn't change the fact that nowadays they do make mistakes on not greenlighting projects, but that's a different topic. Look, I understand that the world building of Jimmy Neutron is weird, but at the same time, if it's consistent, then it works. The Ant Bully's world building really feels really inconsistent at times, that it's difficult to either find the characters relatable or take the world building seriously. To be really honest with you, whenever I see the qualities in the Ant Bully, it will only work if you turn your brain off and not remember the other good animated films that were released around the time or after this film. Because for me personally, whenever I think about this film, it doesn't try too hard, but when it does try too hard, you can tell that it could have been executed a lot more better. And I haven't even gotten into the main characters, mainly Jimmy and Lucas. But before we get to that, let's go talk about the villains, King Goobot and Stan Beers, who is the Exterminator. Due to how the Yokians were executed in the film and how they were portrayed in the series, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, they were a lot different in the show compared to what they were in the film. Since that they're really menacing, and knowing the fact that the budget that they have for the movie in comparison of the TV series, they had a lot to work with King Goobot and the Yokians being one of the first antagonists of Jimmy Neutron. I'm gonna be really honest with you, with King Goobot's motivations in order to induct parents from Retroville in order to have them getting eaten by Potra, I'm gonna be honest, it's weird. Like, really, really weird to have parents being the meal for Potra to eat. And judging the fact that they made changes since that Potra returns in the TV series, this really feels like one of the most awkward ways to have one of the most important people in the world to the parents be in position of getting eaten by an alien chicken. But then again, that doesn't automatically mean King Goobot or Potra or the other Yogians are that terrible. I mean, granted, Professor Calamus ended up becoming a better villain ever since he came into the scene in the series. But the way I see it, judging of how that in the world involving Yogians is supposed to be different, it really shows that even in the movie that is 22 years old can be able to age when it comes to what planet's life is like in comparison on planet Earth. Like, every time I look at King Goobot and the other characters, mainly the Yogians from this, they're a lot more menacing in comparison of how they were portrayed in the series. I mean, say all you want on how they were changed differently, but in all fairness, it really feels like that they just didn't know what to do with the Yokians and want to use them for specialty, since that King Goobot only appears in one of the 1-hour specials of Jimmy Neutron, or 44-minute specials of Jimmy Neutron. Well, the egg Pyre Strikes Back, well, he is fooling everyone, which for me personally, it's difficult for everyone in Retroville to be fooled by the Yokians, except Jimmy Neutron. And in the finale, when it comes to him recruiting the villains from the episodes, for me personally, I think that they were trying to build him up a lot more menacing, considering that he would have done much more vicious things like he did in the film. But considering that Jimmy Neutron villains are also comedic at times, I'm not really expecting any menacing things from King Goobot. Like, I can understand that his portrayal in the episodes that I have mentioned or specials may be problematic, since that he is being voiced by a different actor than the one he's being voiced in the film, but believe me when I say this wasn't originally the plans of releasing the movie before the series, since it was most likely a last-minute decision. But then again, judging the fact that King Goobot gets more screen time than Stan Beals from the Ant Bully is really saying something. Do you want to know how depressing it is on the fact that this character, Stan Beals the Exterminator, only appeals less compared to King Goobot? Is mainly the fact that they removed the deleted scenes that included him, and for me personally, with one of those deleted scenes being nearly completed, while making them more menacing that also includes Zark's backstory, yeah, really shows that the deleted scenes are one of the most important when it comes to the Ant Bully. There are 3 deleted scenes. The first deleted scene is where he wants Lucas's father to sign a contract in order to eliminate the ants or bugs inside their house. The second is where we get to see Zark's backstory on how he has a grudge against humans, which is a good indicator. And the final deleted scene is him enjoying the torture towards bugs. So let's watch this movie without the deleted scenes. At first, he may be intimidated in the fact that he smokes, but in all honesty, there was a lot more to design and develop a character, or in this case, an antagonist, for smoking. I know some of you guys have watched the mortality video involving the Ant Bully when it comes to the ants and Stan Beals himself, but at the same time, everything that has been mentioned in that video is true, because Stan Beals is doing his job, and in comparison of the Exterminator or the Verminator from Over the Hedge that is harming animals, bugs aren't like animals. Like, they're insects, to the point that they're becoming a lot more obnoxious, and judging of how poorly executed the ants are in this movie, it's difficult to root for them, and it's difficult to go against the antagonist who is trying to eliminate the bugs. They only include one scene of him, and that's towards the middle where Hova shows Lucas on what is really wrong with the colony, mainly the Exterminator, and I'm sorry, but it's not going to work, because since the deleted scenes have been removed, and the fact that Stan Beals is doing less harm in comparison of the Verminator from Over the Hedge, it really shows that he's just doing his job. And while the Verminator is doing his job, at the very least, he was being used in order to stop the animals. He was mostly a comic relief, and since that one of the actors who are playing Stan Beals is mostly comedic, and the fact that he only appears in the beginning and end of this film, which for me personally, I'm not a fan of Paul Giamatti, it really shows that it's difficult to go against his character when he only has a few funny moments from the beginning and end. And believe me when I say this, when DNA Productions worked on King Goobot, it really feels like that they had other plans when it comes to the other antagonists of Jimmy Neutron. But when it comes to the Ant Bully, since that they're trying to figure out some of the strategies in order to make the Ant Bully work, they really didn't have anything for Stan Beals aside from the deleted scenes, and the fact that they removed the deleted scenes, they didn't even know how to handle Stan Beals' character, knowing full well that he's supposed to be the antagonist, while the ants are supposed to be the good guys. And since this affects Zark's character, mainly on his motivations onto why he is selfish, and the fact that he's having a difficult time trusting Yugis, then it really shows onto why people consider this as a really mean-spirited film. I mean, granted, I understand that there are other films that have done mean-spirited things that are much more worse than this, but whenever I look at Zark in this movie, on the fact that he lost his development due to the deleted scenes not included, it shows I have less to work with when it comes to his development. Believe me when I say this. I know this character would have done more considering that he shrunk Lucas down, but considering that he doesn't do much through the majority of the film, I'm starting to get convinced that it's mainly the fact that Nicolas Cage is probably one of the most expensive actors of the film, and they just didn't know how to make the scenes work, and they just can't pay him completely, so that's literally all I think. I know that's beyond the case, but considering that the $50 million budget of this film is like that, and it's mainly towards the animation, I'm pretty sure that a chunk of that is mainly towards Nicolas Cage, since he's pretty much the most popular actor in this entire movie. Believe me when I say this, I'm not a fan of how voice actors contribute much, especially famous ones, doing roles that should be in the position for younger talents, but in all honesty, whenever I look at the actors in this, they were probably doing a lot more, and yet at the same time, the script and direction that they get just isn't good enough. Maybe it really shows onto why I don't take actors voicing characters seriously, especially last-minute decisions and actor changes, mainly Sonic the Hedgehog characters. Okay, let's finally talk about the main character who is the main star of the film, Jimmy Neutron and Lucas. I'm gonna be really honest with you, I was originally going to start this with Jimmy, but considering that Lucas is somewhat less compared to Jimmy, which is really saying much, let's go talk about Lucas first. Lucas in the Ant Bully is not one of the worst characters to root for, but it's one of the most underdeveloped characters in any other animated film that I have ever seen. And believe me when I say this, as much as I understand that his life is mainly different in comparison of other lives, it doesn't change the fact that his development is so underwhelming that it's difficult to take him seriously and see his struggles completely. Now yes, it's difficult to get over the fact that you have been bullied constantly, along with the fact that people are calling you smart to the point that you will ever take your frustrations towards ants. But the thing is, we don't get more of that. So just seeing him in the first half of this film being selfish towards the other ants, because he hasn't experienced what it's like to have a friend who respects you, all the while being mostly lonely at times, I'm really having a difficult time to see his point of view completely. Like, regardless if he's a kid, and kids usually act that way, but if you don't do much involving Lucas's character, then I don't understand onto why it's important for us to root for him. And when it comes to him signing the contract that Sam Beals gave to him, since it's before he learned that the ants have living lives of their own, this really shows that a stranger having a marijuana contract just doesn't work. Believe me when I say this. This is one of the indications on the fact that you shouldn't trust strangers, especially exterminators. Well, you never had any problems with bugs in your house, not outside. This really shows that there's a lot of underdeveloped elements in this film that really makes it a lot more difficult to enjoy in comparison of Jimmy Neutron. But before we get into Jimmy Neutron, we're still in Lucas's character here. If his point of view is mainly what it's like to be with friends, despite his friends being insects for the first time, then maybe I would have understood it if we got to see more of him, of what his life is like, because, in all honesty, considering that they only did the elements of copying elements from the book by making them basic, mainly the character not going to school completely and not seeing what their lives are like at school, all the while that we're making friends for the first time, Sometimes I try to see that as relatability, but the thing is, Lucas doesn't have a hobby or any other weird elements that makes him different in comparison of the other kids. Steve, who is the bully, along with the other characters, unlike Steve, they ended up becoming Lucas's friends towards the end, and yet at the same time they didn't do anything at all by helping out Lucas. Like, if the manipulation that Steve did involving the kids is unseen, it really shows that the bully, who only appears briefly in this, needed development as well, because as far as I'm concerned, his trait is mainly just him being bigger than the little guys, which makes him superior. And for me personally, if we literally ignore the awful human designs of the characters, I can guarantee you that they're a lot more underdeveloped and way more one-dimensional compared to the background characters of Jimmy Neutron. Now look, I did discuss the characters of Jimmy Neutron, but when it comes to the background characters who aren't intelligent, they're somewhat slightly smarter than the human characters, considering that they only become props for Lucas. Like, they're against Lucas towards the beginning, and now they side with Lucas towards the end due to the bullying from Steve. Trust me when I say this, I know this may be a stupid ideal, but if the characters mainly who were with Steve in the beginning and the end ended up getting shrugged down to see what life is like as an ant, they will probably get something that makes them stand out differently, despite the character designs that are really bad. Look, the movie would have been a lot more different if we saw the human characters being shrugged down, but considering that the ants are doing a lot more development, not really development, but a lot more screen time in comparison of what we witnessed from the other characters, it's difficult to see the fantasy-like elements from this, knowing forward that it's difficult to work with characters that only appear yes, and then when they decide to hang out with Lucas at the end, it just feels like a cop-out in order to make this small against big a huge important role for this entire film, which does make sense for what the film is trying to do, but since that Stan Beals isn't really that much of a menacing villain, all the while that the ants are mainly just putting Lucas in the position in order to feel what is right to have a friend and what is wrong, I really felt like that Lucas would have had better friends in his normal life. And believe me when I say this, it really shows that the characters, mainly Hova, are difficult to work with. And believe me, Hova ended up becoming the better mother figure than Lucas's mother, which is something that didn't need to work out, but it was all unintentional. Which is really saying something that in the scene where Lucas is trying to cancel the contract by calling Stan Beals on the phone, which he accidentally called the pizza cane for an order that was accidental, which, in my opinion, I honestly thought that this was so out of place that I didn't pay attention when I first watched the film a couple of times during my childhood. It just doesn't work because it really feels like that Lucas is trying to do a good deed by preventing something that he didn't knew that the ants were living creatures. I'm being really honest with you. The pizza cane scene, humorous at first, is a lot more odder when you take into the consideration that it's mainly done in order to make Lucas a better character, despite the fact that he accidentally did the wrong number rather than doing the correct number. It really shows that Lucas's character throughout this entire film is difficult to root for, while the fact that he's being mostly selfish towards the other ants and not realizing of how important it is to be with someone in order to become stronger against that bigger individual. And for me personally, the clip of him just trying to avert something that is going to happen during the climax. It's something that Jimmy Neutron would do, except that he doesn't do anything to stop it. Because believe me, what Jimmy and Lucas have in common is not because of what they did in the film by avoiding something that they caused. It's mainly the fact that the people around them are making fun of them for being small while they're bigger than them. Now granted, it wasn't the case in Jimmy Neutron. Well, Cindy is the one calling Jimmy small, including his brain. But at the same time, this really shows that these two films were made by the same company. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't even think that another animated film who worked on the Ant Bully would ever make that comparison. But the main difference is that in Jimmy Neutron, it actually makes sense because Jimmy Neutron is a scientist that is different than any of the other characters in his classroom. Well, aside from Cindy, who is the second smartest, since that Jimmy is in the classroom. And in all honesty, it kind of works on the fact that people can't be able to relate to Jimmy Neutron in universe. Because as far as I'm concerned, since that it's difficult to side with Jimmy, who is mostly thinking about himself, all the while thinking that his adventures will work out at the end, will end up backfiring on him, it actually works. Now, I understand that I may relate to Jimmy Neutron a little bit more in the fact that I don't go against him completely, especially in the episodes where he makes things worse for everyone. But since that he's also a kid just like Yukis, it somewhat makes sense. Like, at times I understand that I may have triggers of kids' characters making mistakes, and it's mainly making them worse in comparison to the other characters, but in this case, when it comes to Jimmy Neutron, it actually works to the point that it made me convinced that Jimmy's life, despite being good for what he has, just isn't what he wished it was, knowing full well that it made me question onto how his parents will be able to afford everything in his lab. But at the same time, this was made way earlier in the 2000s. So for me personally, back then, we didn't question about any of this, and cancel culture or any criticism didn't happen back then. Well, aside from movie critics, that is. Here's something that I want you guys to understand. If you are like Jimmy Neutron and you have a hobby that you have huge dedication towards, and it somehow manages to make your life much more better in the real world, would you relate to Jimmy Neutron, since that he has the ability to make inventions which no other person would do in this universe? Because as far as I'm concerned, it really shows how the lore of Jimmy Neutron works a lot more better in comparison to the Ant Bully, and the fact that the Ant Bully is trying to be different in comparison of Jimmy Neutron, since that it's mainly been pitched by Woody actor Tom Hanks, mainly the actor who voiced Woody, who produced the Ant Bully. It makes it a lot more awkward when you take into consideration that one of the people who worked on the most popular Pixar franchises worked on this. Though then again, this was during the time, well, Pixar is just trying to experiment things, and this was out 4 years before Toy Story 3. Sometimes it shows that when people like Tom Hanks pursue to other activities outside of Pixar, who is a good actor, isn't really a good producer involving a film like this. Though then again, it really shows that this film ended up becoming the way it is when it comes to deleted scenes being removed, and the clip of Zach and Lucas having the scene together, I would say it's pretty much the greatest scene throughout the entire film, but at the same time, due to poor execution, it wasn't as better as I thought. When it comes to the two climaxes, I couldn't pick a favorite, because in the Jimmy Neutron climax, it's really basic for what it is, but at the same time, they're literally doing the equipment that they have, and this was the first animated film. And when it comes to the Ant Bullies climax, I would say that it's unique for what it is, but considering that Stan Beals is difficult to go against, let's just say that he doesn't deserve anything when it comes to his demise. I'm gonna be really honest with you, I don't know how they're gonna be able to do an alternative take while he sees the ants as living creatures, but that would probably be a stupid ending, so they just come up with this ending by having the potion affect him to be in this position. Well, I'm starting to think that if you get stung by a bee with the potion, you become that, unless if you put a potion in your ear or mouth, you become shrunken down or whizzing back up or something like that. So you may think that this video is almost over, but I have a few more things to discuss. It's no surprise that Jimmy Neutron ended up becoming the better movie over The Ant Bully, but you may think that I'm gonna be mainly going against The Ant Bully for being the reason until why we never got a continuation from Jimmy Neutron after season 3. But the thing is, Jimmy Neutron, if the Ant Bully was successful, wasn't going to last forever. Because even though that Nickelodeon may want DNA Productions to do more seasons until it's died down, and I understand that in season 3 episodes that have the characters flanderized and mainly over the top, but at the same time, while I look at DNA Productions, it really feels like they're trying to form an identity of their own, and the fact that after Jimmy Neutron comes to an end, they need to focus on other projects. Because let me tell you, I understand that DNA Productions went to a different route in comparison of Pixar and DreamWorks and future animated studios in the future. But at the same time, Nickelodeon owns the rights of Jimmy Neutron. And when people say that Nickelodeon doesn't care about Jimmy Neutron and SpongeBob is the reason why Jimmy Neutron is killed, may I remind you that a year after Jimmy Neutron had to be cancelled, Nickelodeon premiered the Jimmy Neutron movie, even if they did that before, but in 2007. But they have Jimmy, Carla, and Sheen do an audience commentary on Jimmy Neutron itself. And while you can't be able to watch the entire experience online since I've searched everywhere, it really shows that even after DNA Productions came to an end, Nickelodeon is still advertising Jimmy Neutron, especially since that he became a playable character in the latest 2 Nicktoon games again. Attack of the Toybots and Globs of Doom. Trust me, if you really think that Nickelodeon never cared about Jimmy Neutron, then they wouldn't have him have time slots of its own in 2007, and believe me, I've seen those time slots. Now, this is mainly the fact that even if Jimmy Neutron got cancelled, it may be a good thing for the franchise since it didn't win into Season of What, unlike the Fairly Odd Parents, which went through Season of What after 2006. I need to be really honest with you. I'm pretty sure that Jimmy Neutron itself will probably still come to an end regardless, considering that DNA Productions is a different company in comparison to the companies that worked on Nicktoons. Mainly Fairly Odd Parents and even SpongeBob. Because the way I see it, whenever I look at CGI cartoons, mainly from Jimmy Neutron, there's a lot in depth when it comes to making the world of CGI. Now, yes, I understand that other cartoons do have worlds building of their own, but considering that the cartoons that I've seen involving SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents are mostly over-exaggerated, and the fact that Jimmy Neutron isn't exaggerated completely, like, all the time, it shows a lot on how this cartoon has aged way more than other Nicktoons. Now, granted, it may be debatable, but considering that the original plans was to make a sequel towards the Jimmy Neutron film, and the fact that they were planning on to, unless if they got more money, mainly from the Ant Bully, then it kind of shows that DNA Productions, despite doing more plans of Jimmy Neutron, would have done other plans in the meantime. I just want you to know that even if you're looking into this as a Jimmy Neutron fan, mainly the fact that you're into Nicktoons and those Nicktoons are from Jimmy Neutron, you need to understand that DNA Productions are also a company that pursue different activities, and the same thing applies to Pixar and others. Like, if Pixar made non-stop Toy Story sequels and not other original films like Monsters Inc., then they will probably be in a position where the reputation will have been just like Blue Skies when it came to making so many Ice Age sequels. Back then, I was really into the idea of Jimmy Neutron that should have gotten a 4th season, should have a conclusion and stuff like that, but after rewatching the Jimmy Neutron episodes again, and how my opinions have changed over time, no offense, but do you really think it's worth it to have Jimmy Neutron have a conclusion after 17 years? Because for me personally, DNA Productions has become a thing of the past, to the point that 2006 is mainly becoming one of those classical years. And for me personally, whenever I think about classical years, I always think about the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. I never think about the 2000s or the 2010s. It really shows that I was thinking about more of a classical material rather than what is really old. Well, it aged much more better in the modern times. And while the Ant Bully didn't age, and it's the biggest reason onto why it bombed at the box office, I'm gonna be really honest with you, the bashing towards this film is really becoming repetitive. I understand that this movie is mediocre and it's not one of the best films ever, but the thing is, whenever I think about the Ant Bully and how I think about it back then, it really shows that studios like DNA Productions have different tastes and different techniques when it comes to animated films. And when it comes to animated films that were released in 2006, it was a lot different in comparison of 2001, because with the Ant Bully being sandwiched into 2 other films, Monster House and Barnyard, that ended up becoming financial successes in comparison of the Ant Bully, it kind of shows that CGI animation were literally becoming a huge must-see back at the day, while 2D animation, aside from Studio Ghibli doing 2D animation, is completely gone, which really shows that Jimmy Neutron was successful back in 2001, despite having poor animation in comparison of Shrek and Monsters Inc. in 2001. Like, you can say all you want that this movie didn't need to exist, but if it did, there should have been a lot more effort into it in order to make it better in comparison of other animated films released around the time. Sometimes people are judgmental when it comes to first impressions, especially when they judge this movie by its poster, but if I'm gonna be really honest with you, considering that Nickelodeon's Barnyard was a lot more successful because there was a lot more effort into it, and while the effort into the Ant Bully is mainly mixed because there were so many missed opportunities, it really feels like DNA Productions really need to start from scratch, but start from scratch in order to start off something that is successful like Jimmy Neutron, but not on the same levels as Jimmy Neutron. Like, around the time when this movie aired, this was before Illumination became a thing, along with other studios, and to be perfectly real with you, studios that went out of business due to huge box office bombs were a lot worse in comparison of the Ant Bully that did worse domestically, because believe me, I can instantly tell you that if the other anime films that will never box office bombs, we will probably see this film as one of the biggest box office bombs in history. But at the same time, with the budget still expensive, isn't as expensive as other films like Mars Needs Moms, it really shows that the people working on this film had to work what they have in order to make the film good for what it is, even though that they made poor decisions along the way. And while I didn't talk about a lot involving Jimmy Neutron, the movie, mainly Cindy, and a few aspects of the Ant Bully, mainly Hova, but at the same time, it's really not much of a big deal considering that those elements would have done much more better if everything around them has been executed much more better. Because let me tell you, after 17 long years of realizing that the Ant Bully is the reason onto why Jimmy Neutron came to an end, it's disappointing, sure, and you would have felt that feeling back in 2007, 6 or 7 if you got the information, but when you get older and older and just realize of how DNA Productions becoming an ancient studio in history, with Jimmy Neutron being one of the only materials that have aged a lot more better, it really shows that you will probably see the employees who used to work with DNA Productions have talent, but at the same time, they just didn't know how to handle the talent when it comes to newer projects. And since that the Ant Bully is focusing on Lucas's trying to know what it's like to be an ant by using ant powers, which for somehow it works and sometimes it doesn't, I'm gonna be really honest with you, if I did express that involving Lucas's character, it wouldn't make a difference because he doesn't use these powers once he gets back into his normal size. I mean, granted, it's mainly the important goals that he needs to do after being shrunken down, but at the same time, since that he never uses these powers again, and the fact that Jimmy ends up doing more inventions after the film, maybe it really shows onto why that this movie didn't got a show of its own. And even if it wasn't going to be the case, it probably won't be a good idea. Like, can you imagine that if A Bug's Life gets a show of its own, there are possibilities, but at the same time, they did much more better in comparison of the Ant Bully. And while Ants has aged a lot more different in comparison of A Bug's Life and the Ant Bully, at the very least, it had a racing video game. It may be stupid and weird, but at the same time, it really feels like that the only way for Ants to become successful again is to be made into a racing game, which I do have. Ants Extreme Racing. The more you think about it, the more you realize onto how they didn't know what to do with the Ants IP completely, and if they did make a sequel out of Ants, I'm pretty sure it would have been a lot more different than it was back then. I'm just saying right now, with the drama of A Bug's Life and the Ants still becoming a topic even to this day, maybe there's a reason onto why bug movies aren't really the most must-see materials when it comes to films ever. If you ask me, it really shows that when DreamWorks released B-Movie at the end of 2007, it was good, but mainly for the over-the-top reasons that if I ever talk about that film, it will probably be a difficult time to see the logic in that film in comparison to the Ant Bully. So yeah, this has been my analysis on Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius vs. the Ant Bully, the two DNA production films. And to be perfectly real with you, at this point, I may do more Jimmy Neutron videos in the future, but considering my original plans was to talk about the Jimmy Neutron film, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have anything else to say about it, especially since I have more knowledge towards this than than what I have in comparison of the Ant Bully. Granted, my knowledge towards the TV series is a lot more different since that there was a lot more to work with when it comes to the addition of new characters, but with this kickstarting the franchise, if we're ever going to see Jimmy Neutron again when it comes to a reboot, which for me personally, it's mainly if or it won't, I'm pretty sure that they're probably going to be in a position where they need to figure out how to do the world building all over again. Because believe me when I say this, I don't think that they're going to replicate what they did from the film and just go straight to the series, which was the original plans. Like, I may not be into the idea of Jimmy Neutron being in the reboot, all the while that I'm not really that thrilled to see Jimmy Neutron Season 4. But still, if you watch the Ant Bully for at least once, and just see that it's from the same studio that made Jimmy Neutron, it really shows that DNA Productions have other things to do aside from Jimmy Neutron. And the only thing I'm gonna see DNA's Productions' future is that if they have Jimmy or Goddard be the mascot. That's literally all I can think of. So yeah, that's my entire video, longer than it needed to be, but at the same time, it's somewhat of a long time coming, and also a good addition to Summerpalooza for Beach Paradise, despite have nothing to do with beaches. But at the same time, I'm still trying to make this schedule unique as it was in the last few years. I'm giving Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius a 7.5 out of 10, while the Ant Bully gets a 5 out of 10.